This is the download recap from Sounds Profitable, the most important news from this week and why it matters to people in the business of podcasting. I'm Gavin Gaddis. The download recap is brought to you by Podscribe. You can find out more at podscribe.com. Now, let's get into the week's top stories. First up, 860 thoughts about the rumored SiriusXM and iHeart deal by Tom Webster. With several hot takes and narratives forming around the rumored SiriusXM deal to acquire iHeartMedia, as well as several alternate shapes such a merger could take, Webster drills down to the notion SiriusXM would strip iHeart's radio stations of local content. He performed a 3-market audit of iHeart radio stations as of late April 2026. Here's a quote from the article, quote, "I selected 3 U.S. markets for this audit using 2 criteria. First, mid-size, large enough that you'd expect significant local programming if any was going to exist, and small enough to avoid the markets that are themselves origination points for nationally syndicated iHeart content, such as New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Nashville, Atlanta, and Phoenix. Second, geographical and cultural diversity, the Midwest, Indianapolis, Northeast Rust Belt in Pittsburgh, and Mountain West, Salt Lake City." End quote. Despite broadcast licenses coming with an FCC requirement to, quote, "serve the public interest with programming responsive to the local community of license," end quote, Webster's findings show a marked lack of locally produced content. Less than 4% of weekday airtime minutes in the biggest local content stronghold, Pittsburgh, feature a person in the city talking about the city itself. Indianapolis's data worked out to, quote, "effectively 0," end quote. He points out the actual legitimate local content found on the average commercial radio station, local ads. There are real potential risks to such a merger, though the broader idea such a merger would kill local radio does not pan out. The majority of the local radio pitched in that argument no longer exists. In fact, with localism lying in local advertising, there's a world where a SiriusXM merger could serve local markets better than they had it under existing networks. S&P analysis. U.S. podcast consumption grows as industry embraces video. S&P Global Market Intelligence data shows U.S. podcast listening now has grown 10 percentage points from Q1 2025 to Q1 2026, with nearly 60% of U.S. online adults reporting podcast listening in the past year. Here's a quote from Winslow's coverage. Quote, "S&P Global Market Intelligence attributed the surge in usage to the evolving landscape of podcast content and the rising popularity of video podcast platforms." End quote. This figure is close to Sounds Profitable's The Podcast Landscape 2025 findings, which show that 68% of respondents have consumed a podcast, audio or video, in the past year. While S&P's data specifies listeners, the percentage of podcast landscape respondents who say they are video only hovers around 8 to 9%. When compared to the S&P figure, this percentage brings out the total in line with podcast landscape audience findings on podcast audience growth. Nielsen integrates Triton data into media planning platform. The integration brings Triton Digital's Podcast Metrics Demos Plus data into Nielsen's Media Impact, or NMI, planning platform. The integration is expected to give ad buyers more data-driven insights and provide more holistic view of the audio market. Here's a quote from Nielsen Audio Managing Director Rich Tunkel in the official release. Quote, "Our collaboration with Triton Digital makes it easier for advertisers to evaluate and plan podcasts alongside and with the same level of precision, comparability, and confidence as other media channels, delivering a critical need." End quote. Nielsen also kicked off Possible in Miami this week, announcing Predictive Sales Lift, a new outcomes-based measurement capability. The feature helps media buyers predict sales lift for incremental video ad campaigns in the Nielsen One Ads platform. The Nigerian podcasting ecosystem, Africa's largest English-language audio market, takes shape. A new piece from Tony Onwuchekwa. The Nigerian Podcast Index 2025 report looks at 329 shows across 20-plus hosting platforms in 6 languages to provide a bird's-eye view of the country's podcast industry. In Africa's most populous country, podcasting is defined largely by language and platform. 88% of Nigerian Podcast Index-tracked podcasts are recorded in English, making them accessible to outside markets while maintaining local roots. Nigeria's podcasting scene remains somewhat dependent on international platforms, with no significant example of domestic hosting infrastructure. AfriPods hosts just 4% of indexed Nigerian podcasts, while Spotify for Creators hosts 58%. The white elephant in the room for Nigerian podcasting is data. Here's a quote from Onwuchekwa's coverage. Quote, "Without reliable measurement infrastructure, Nigerian podcasting remains largely invisible to global advertisers and investors. This creates a vicious cycle. No data means no investment, which means no resources to build the measurement systems that would attract investment. For context, Nigeria's population of 223 million people and rapidly growing internet penetration suggests the market could be massive, but could be doesn't secure advertising deals or venture funding." End quote. With credible metrics, improved monetization, and viable domestic hosting infrastructure, he sees more runway for Nigerian podcasting to fulfill its potential. Now it's time for quick hits. These are top stories we've covered throughout the week that you should include in your weekend reading. They just didn't make it in today's top stories. As for the rest of the news we have, European audio platform Audion has raised $15 million in a funding round and is expanding into the United States. All Libsyn hosting plans now have video functionality, allowing users to manually submit Libsyn-hosted MP4 files to Spotify. Video distribution directly into Spotify, enabled by the Spotify Distribution API, starts at $25 a month. Reggie Rousseau, managing partner at Amplitude Media Partners, breaks down recent Megaphone updates in a new LinkedIn post and how they will impact your campaigns. And Spreaker Create for Browser has launched, acting as a free browser-based podcast editor that does not require an account. That was the download recap brought to you by Sounds Profitable. I know I go through the stories fast, so reminder, there is a link in your show notes that takes you to today's episode post on soundsprofitable.com, where you can find all of the links to everything I've talked about today, as well as subscribe to the newsletter version if you want to get future installments sent direct to your inbox. For Sounds Profitable, I'm Gavin Gaddis. Our producers are myself, Brian Barletta, Molly DeMillier, and Tom Webster. Special thanks, as always, to you for sticking with me as I brought you all the top stories from this week in the business of podcasting. Robot.
Download complete.